Hello, this is Moresh, and today we are going to talk about permissionless, permission minimized governance at OpenDAO. So, one of the key objectives of the permissionless, permission minimized governance is to reduce and eliminate bureaucracy wherever possible. We don't want, while we want DAO to vote, we don't want DAO to vote on every single thing because that goes against the permissionless ethos of decentralized finance. We want people to be able to do most of their things by default, and only in cases where an exception is warranted, we will invoke DAO votes. So one of the key things which we want to implement as part of that is a process in which any token can be added in a permissionless manner to mint USDO. So the objective is to use any token to mint USDO, and what that does is it allows anyone to present any token and subject to certain conditions. I mean, you can't like just mint a token out of thin air and start minting USDO out of it. It needs to have certain volume, trade volumes, etc. before we can use it. But by default, any token which has enough volume should be able to use it to mint USDO. So the objective over here is to not have any drawn out governance process, no or very minimal bureaucracy. And why do we want to do it in this fashion? Because it will lead to a significant growth in the amount of USDO that is minted. And it will obviously boost TVL as well as adoption of USDO itself. Now, let's talk about how we are going to achieve this. So the current design is there is a single money market, which is a fork of Compound, and all assets are added on the same instance. So you just keep on adding one instance after another. And then there are various assets. For example, on BSC, there is Cake, BNB, etc., etc. And we mint USDO against it. So when we add that, we determine what is the collateral factor for it, which assets to add, oracles for price or manual updates of price, etc. And whenever we want to add new assets, we can add them, but then it becomes just one single instance which has many tokens in there, and that makes the whole process bloated and gassy. So, and beyond that, also adding new collateral still requires some admin intervention. So it is a centralized point of control where any new collateral which is added has to go through an approvals process. And we want to move away from that. We want to move towards a Uniswap model where anybody can add any token without needing any permission from a centralized asset. So for that, we are moving towards eventually we will have what is known as a V2 design. It's still a few months away, but in that we are going to have a factory code. I mean, it's Compound factory, which means that you're really deploying a new instance of Compound. So anybody should be able to trigger the factory and create a new instance of Compound money market. And in that, only two assets will be added by default. And the default asset out of that pair is USDO. So one USDO, and then you can have another asset in there, which is going to be supplied by a parameter by the user. So it can be, for example, it can be OpenUSDO or ETHUSDO or etc. USDO. So it basically creates a new money market in which there are only two assets. One of them is USDO, and the other is whatever asset you want it as collateral to mint USDO. Now, the default price of USDO is always set to 1 because it's our system. On the market, it can be above or below, but then there is an arbitrage opportunity. But the default price of USDO is always set to 1. The new assets price, for example, if you have open token, then that can be read from AMMs, and we can take a TWAP, or we can also take a time-weighted median price in the event there is any fluctuations in the price. Now, the real question becomes, what is the collateral factor for this? For example, if we have Tom, Dick and Harry token, which is a newly launched token, it has enough volumes. How do we determine what is the collateral factor for the new Tom, Dick and Harry token. And that is solved by noting the fact that the more liquid your asset, the more your collateral factor should be. Which means collateral factor is a function of trading volume. So the quality of the asset itself doesn't really matter. What matters is how liquid is the asset. And as long as the asset is liquid, if somebody doesn't really pay back their collateral, then you can always dispose it. You can liquidate the position and dispose it and close the borrowed position. So the collateral factor is a function of trade volume. Okay, and the trade volume you can get from the AMM. For example, the highest volume on let's say is ETH, and for ETH we set the collateral factor as 65 to 70% max, and everything else will be lower than that. So what we really need to do is we need to read the volume. So typically on an exchange they show both the price and the volume, or you might have to get it via some additional calculations which can go before that, or you might have to read it via an oracle. But point is, once you have the volume, then you can really adjust the collateral factor as a function of the volume. So the more volume, trade volume, the higher your collateral factor, and vice versa. And obviously there will be thresholds, which means that if your volume is lower than this, then you don't accept the token as collateral. And even if you, for example, if an asset deteriorates and the volume drops, then eventually its collateral factor should be 0, at which point the market becomes worthless. But if an asset becomes more liquid, then you should be able to borrow more against it. Not only due to its price appreciation, but also due to its improvement in the liquidity itself. So price and collateral factor to be updated per transaction per block. So anybody who transacts with the market will be effectively updating it by reading it from the AMM. So effectively there will be many instances with pairs against USDO, for example ABC USDO, DF USDO, GHI USDO, etc. Depending upon their trade volumes, their collateral factors will be different, of course, their prices will be different, and depending upon the demand and supply for USDO in that market, the interest rates can be high, low, medium, etc. So a user who has USDO, who wants to deploy, can approach this single unified interface. And there could be filters saying that, okay, only show me interest pairs which have interest rates above a certain point, or collateral factors above a certain point, etc. And then the user can choose where to deploy his or her USDO. There could be even bots which sort of run off automated strategies based upon the risk versus reward ratios. And basically the USDO holders get to choose based upon what asset is backing it, what collateral factor is, and what is the interest rate. So depending upon the risk versus reward, they can deploy. And in a lot of cases, these things will be automated because there will be bots who will be running on top of this. So the question becomes, how does USDO enter circulation? And the answer is the DAO will vote and create it out of thin air. And USDO is minted, and that USDO gets supplied to a single instance of compound which is comprising only of blue chip assets like WE, Ethereum, BTC, etc. And for example, tokenized real estate, because OpenDAO is all about connecting real world assets to DeFi. And these default accepted collateral can then be used by anybody who has USDO to mint USDO, borrow USDO. Anybody who has the collateral to get the supplied USDO based upon the collateral factor which is decided at admin level over here. And then from here, the people who get the USDO from here can basically supply to the universal list, where they can get potentially higher yields and make their USDO work harder for them. So the overall outcome is that any token will be added as collateral, just like Uniswap, completely permissionless and no decisions needed from DAO, creating a fully permissionless design. And that should lead to a significant adoption as well as increase in TVL for USDO. Thank you. Bye.